Get Rich Education is brought to you by Norada Real Estate, the Real Asset Investor, and Highlands Residential Mortgage.
Are you having a hard time finding great investment properties? Unfortunately, the best deals are rarely found locally. Successful investing begins with the right properties in the right markets. Norada Real Estate provides everything you need to invest in the best deals across the U.S. Our simple, proven system will help you create real wealth and passive monthly cash flow. Get your free copy of the ultimate guide to passive real estate investing at noradarealestate.com/guide. That's NORADA realestate.com/guide.
Welcome to Get Rich Education with Keith Weinhold, giving you information and ideas on the investment that has turned more ordinary people into millionaires and billionaires than anything else, and can provide you with more wealth and happiness than you ever thought possible. Now, here's your host, investor, entrepreneur, business owner, and educator, Keith Weinhold.
Welcome to Get Rich Education, episode 131. Hi, I'm your host, Keith Weinhold, and I'm back to help you build your wealth today, along with Rich Dad Advisor Ken McElroy. Next week, we'll be talking about weapons of mass production with Seth Williams. You might know Seth from Bigger Pockets and the lighter side of real estate. Yes, weapons of mass production, as we're going to be talking about some of our favorite websites and apps for both real estate investing and then just for your productivity in general. The week after that, we're going to be talking about mortgage loans with one of the nation's top mortgage loan officers for originating income property loans for you. And then the week after that, in 3 weeks, I expect to have Mr. Tax-Free here as Rich Dad Advisor Tom Wheelwright will return to the show then. Today, Ken and I are going to talk about what your tenant wants. Ken controls over 10,000 units in multiple cities, so he has this vision to see the rental trends in his company, MC Companies. You know, they don't just go with anecdotal, oh, well, it seems kind of like this sort of stuff, okay? Instead, for example, his company basically polls tenants at move out to learn why someone moved so that he can better serve future tenants, and he's going to share that with you here. And, you know, something else I ought to tell you, listening closely to someone with Ken's experience and vision can make you tens of $millions or more, but Ken's so down to earth in his delivery of the information, and he's so approachable that you shouldn't overlook just what's on his mind today. From the early days of managing properties for others to being a well-known investing authority and successful entrepreneur today, our guest has considerable experience in property management as well as real estate investing across the United States. With 27 years of elite-level experience under his belt, he's offered his fans multiple real estate investing books, both within and outside of the Rich Dad series, including his really almost iconic book, The ABCs of Real Estate Investing. His articles appear alongside mine at richdadadvisors.com, and he's also Robert Kiyosaki's longtime Rich Dad advisor for real estate. His true passion to educate others has led him to speak internationally on real estate investing, entrepreneurship, and the keys to financial freedom. He co-owns MC Companies, a real estate investment and property management company with over 10,000 units owned and 350 employees. Joining me today from the Phoenix, Arizona area, he first appeared here on episode 25. Then again, he was here last year with us on episode 86. Welcome back to Get Rich Education for your third appearance, Rich Dad Advisor Ken McElroy.
Hey, thanks, Keith. Great to be on again.
Ken, it's great to have you back. Businesses prosper to the extent that they serve customers. And being a real estate investor, that's a business. And the customer that we serve is known as a tenant. Some people like to call them residents. But either way, you know, just like a pineapple farmer ultimately needs to keep the grocery shopper happy with large and juicy pineapples, or Samsung or Apple needs to develop phones for users with user-friendly interfaces, or they won't be in business much longer. You know, a real estate investor ultimately often is through a property manager, but they need to provide a tenant with what they want. So you invest across the United States with a lot of units, and you've been doing this for so long. What do you see that tenants want today that maybe they didn't want so much 5 or 10 or 20 years ago?
Yeah, great question. It's interesting. If you look at, the age, you have to really go back to the age So 10 years ago, the demographic for renters, they're now 35 years old, right? And so the new demographic is, they don't call it 25. It's really as simple as taking a look at what that demographic wants right now. And oddly enough, they're a very mobile group. They're going to where jobs are. They're not as loyal to employers. And they're actually looking for smaller places as opposed to the big places with the big furniture. They're more lean. They're not really pack rats. And, they have pets and they're very electronic savvy. So you got to have very, very good Wi-Fi. Actually, believe it or not, it's a fairly basic apartment. I read everything and anything I can on this industry, and we're starting to see 200 and 300 square foot apartments being built for people and that are in decent areas, but they're really, really tiny. And essentially, that's what people are looking for. Something they can just sleep in, maybe cook something in and hang out, but not the big entertainment as of old. So obviously, from a landlord and from a property management perspective, everything's changed. This industry has gone from kind of a mom and pop industry to Wall Street in the last 10 years. And so that's brought a very high level of professionalism at the management level, which has been really needed. And that's now expected. You have to have everything. You have to have the lawns cut. You have to have outside grounds maintained. You have to have a quick turnaround on the maintenance and all of those things. And while those should have been always done promptly, I would say 10 years ago, there was kind of a hit and miss there. So the level of service has really jumped up. On the bigger stuff like what we have, we've gone to the full fitness centers, the parties. We have activity directors and things like that at our communities. And in some communities, we even have actually vans where we can shuttle people around. We have bartenders on happy hours and things like that. And so the level of service has really stepped up. And I think that's partly due to back in, let's say, not quite 10 years ago, when the apartments were kind of going into flux. When you have vacancy, you have to raise your level of service because every single tenant is important. And you have to think that way when occupancy is high too. But a lot of people don't. A lot of people say, well, if that person leaves, I can find another one quickly. And so it's a discipline that you have to maintain all the way through. And I love the fact that the whole industry is getting more professional.
Well, yeah, there's a lot to touch on there. If tenants aren't requiring as much space as they did before, some of them as little as 200 to 300 square feet, well, that makes me think about a few things as the investor. On a positive side, I think that I can probably get more dollars per square foot with the smaller place than I could with the larger place. But then the problem with the smaller place is that makes that more tenant more nimble and more easy to move and more easy to vacate, causing that vacation and turnover. What are your thoughts there?
Well, that's true. Ultimately, it only works in markets where it works. So it's going to work around universities. It's going to work in urban core areas. It's not going to work in suburbs. So while they're wanting those things, you may not have the demand for a whole bunch of 200 and 300 square foot type apartments. It might not be feasible from an income standpoint to even try it. That's definitely what we're seeing. We're seeing in the core areas and around big employers and especially around universities, we're seeing a lot smaller places being developed and higher rents per foot for sure. So yes, to answer your question, that definitely works, but it probably wouldn't work on the outskirts of Anchorage, Alaska, where you're from.
Yeah.
But it definitely will work in San Francisco, downtown. So it has to be in the right area.
Sure. When snow shovels take up 100 square feet of every Anchorage, Alaska home, yeah, you need to have some room left to live and sleep.
Yeah, exactly.
So as real estate investors, I kind of think of it, Ken, as we offer tenants both a product and a service. And basically pulling back, big picture, what I'm hearing from you is with smaller places, now maybe there's less emphasis on the product. Of course, it's still important. And there's more emphasis on the service.
Yeah, I think the service has always been a big one for us. And I think that a lot of people are starting to raise their bar. Product itself, in my opinion, is always a function of what the market demand is. So there are going to be ebbs and flows. You and I were talking about this before this interview, where you had some, negative rent growth in Anchorage, Alaska, for example. And we're definitely seeing that in other markets. You're seeing flat rents and negative rents and certainly a lot of other metros around the U.S. And so whenever that happens, you basically are doing whatever you can on the service side, and the product is what it is. And when you have a market that's incredibly demanding, that's when you can kind of get creative on the product side.
So any trends as far as if we just kind of leave and go outside the walls of rented unit, any trends sort of toward more people wanting to be toward the urban core or away from the urban core? Or is that pretty specific on metros, or how's that look?
If you've watched, the nation has moved to renting right now.
Yeah.
And a lot of that has been a result of credit issues and things that happened from the banking crisis in the 2007, 2008. So a lot of the people have damaged credit. A lot of people don't have down payments, and a lot of people are still dusting themselves off from that period of time. And in addition to that, Keith, there hasn't been a lot of new construction. So populations have still grown, and albeit differently in different markets, but they've still grown. That's the one thing, is all you have to do is go to the U.S. Bureau of Statistics, and you can click on how many live births happened 25 years ago, and you'll see how many kids are turning 25 this year. That never stopped. We're all focused on the banking crisis and everything. Well, still, you've got 4 to 5 million 25-year-olds turning 25 every year, and so they're hitting the market regardless of what's happening. They created a huge demand for renters. Well, now, on the flip side of that, they didn't necessarily have some of the higher paying jobs and things like that. So a lot of them moved in with their parents and doubled up and did all kinds of stuff. They took jobs, just to get out of the house, but they might be $10, $15, $20 an hour jobs. So they're not careers like the generation before. I think that there's still a huge demand for rentals, but I think that generally renters have gotten the brunt of a lot of rent increases, over the last 7 or 8 years. And the landlords have been loving it. But it's not necessarily healthy to have those kinds of rent increases for the renter either, because then you start getting into affordability issues because their cost of living is not going up at the same spot. And I'm right in the middle of it, as you know.
Right.
I mean, we're in Austin, Texas, Houston, Texas, San Antonio, Dallas, Tulsa, Oklahoma, and Oklahoma City, and of course Phoenix and Tucson. And we're in a lot of metros. And so all the rent growth has been different in each of those markets. And even on one side of town versus the other, it's been different, depending on where we are. But the point is, generally, we've seen 20 to 50, even more, 50% increases in rent over that period of time. If somebody's sitting there at a job and they're living comfortably, that extra $300, $400, $500 a month is a lot of money to them. And I think they're making choices right now based on that. And that's why I think we're starting to see some flatness of rent, even though there's still a fairly big demand in the market.
Yeah, okay. So maybe that affordability has just really been tested and tried. And it's at this point, with all the rent increases we've had in recent years, it's just difficult to cross that threshold into a new and higher level of rent.
I think it is. I'll just give you one example. We bought a building in Austin, Texas. I've owned it for 10 years now. The rents were in the $700 to $800 range when we bought it. And, they're in the $1,200 range now. This is for the same units, 10 years later. And not that the same renters are there, some are over the 10-year period, but that's a big increase in rent to have. Now you're starting to get into their travel money and their gym, memberships and the extra things that they do. That is if their salaries haven't gone up at the same pace, which in most cases they haven't. These renters are taking a hit right now in lots of places. And so they move out further out of town. They look for the cheaper rent. They do the longer commute. They double up, or they move out of the town. That's another issue. You look at some of the markets like Seattle, San Francisco, even Austin, Texas, it's expensive to live downtown. So if you're a first responder, an ambulance, fire, police, you can't live there. Pushes the response time out. I think in San Francisco, I read that it's another 17 minutes or something. It's a crazy number if you think about it. Like if you have an issue and you have to wait for a first responder for an extra 15 minutes because they can't live in the city, that's a problem. We're starting to see issues, affordability issues in some of the core markets. And you're going to start to see, rent control and things like that, I think, pop up in a lot of these areas. And I think it's warranted, actually. You know me, I'm a capitalistic landlord, but the truth is, it has to be a good mix. We have to have affordability in there for the teachers and for the people, service people that are in the restaurants and all the things. And they shouldn't have to drive an hour.
Yeah, so affordability can actually run up against public safety and be a little bit threatening to an area if rent prices and that affordability has been run down so much in the market. And things have been good for real estate investors and landlords like me for the last 10 or so years. I think a lot of us know that the home ownership rate is at a multi-generational low, and sometimes the layperson has to think about that. But, low home ownership, that typically translates to, well, that means that there are more renters. And, it's kind of funny. I was talking with someone recently, Ken, and they said, well, you just have two choices. You can either own or you can rent. You touched on a third choice. You can also live with your parents. That is another option. Or fourthly, you can be homeless. So there really are four options out there. We always hope that homelessness isn't one of them because we do want to serve tenants. We do want to have good public safety. I mean, effectively, us as entrepreneurs, we do have a responsibility to provide housing for people. These are people's homes. So this is actually really important stuff that we're talking about. But we talk about affordability. That, of course, isn't always a function of just what the rent amount is. And that leads me to Ken. I'm wondering, are there any places where you need to make concessions in order to get tenants in there? For example, giving away the first month free, or do you see anything happening on the other end where you see some markets where you go for 2-year leases because you know that you can get them rather than 1-year leases? Do you see any trends either way, that way in some of the metros that you're in?
We haven't, but none of the metros that we're in have gotten to that point yet. We're definitely seeing less rent growth. And you touched on an issue that's very interesting. So when we were in business, of course, for a long time, in 2007, 2008, we saw firsthand people double up. We saw firsthand parents moving in with kids and kids moving in with parents and kids moving in with grandparents. And I read, it's been about 5 years ago, maybe 6, that at one point we had almost 25 million people move back home. So that's a huge number. I don't know what the number is now, but there's a huge renter demand. And of course, I've been through multiple cycles. And here's essentially how it works, Keith. The first thing that happens is rent growth goes to flat, no growth. That's the first thing. And that might be 3 months, 6 months, a year, but you start to see a resistance in the actual rent itself. And you start to see the market kind of flattening out as far as being able to do rent increases. In other words, when somebody moves, renting the next month higher or the next year higher. So we're starting to see that in some markets, like San Antonio, oddly enough. We had the last half of 2016, we had kind of flat rent growth. Now, from there, Keith, there's all kinds of things that can happen. Usually what happens is you'll get $100 off, to rent, and then it'll go to $250, and then it'll go to $500, and then it'll go to 1 month free, and then it'll go to 1.5, and then 2. And I've seen in the worst periods back in the 90s, 3 months free on a 12-month lease, if you can even believe that. Now, there's a bunch of factors with that, however. In 2007 and 2008, it had to do with employment. Everybody was losing their homes. But at the same time, the economy wasn't doing so well. So there was big job losses and things like that, as you know, and unemployment was going up. But it could also be an oversupply of an area. So you can have an area that's just fine from let's say a stability standpoint, but they can drop 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 units in a several mile square radius. And all of a sudden, that little market's out of balance. Whereas literally the other side of town, which might only be a 20-minute drive, might be just fine. Real estate is a very local business, as you know, and addition of supply or a loss of jobs, like we were talking about today in Anchorage, it's also the same in Houston, Texas, where we have property. When oil went down, there was ensuing job losses. And so, it wasn't an oversupply issue, but there was a time in Houston where it was an oversupply issue. We had occupancy issues, and right now it's a loss of job issue. So you have to get down into the minutia to see what's happening. And in those markets, we haven't had to resort to any kind of free rent yet. But if it continues and there's more job losses, then it's very much a possibility.
You're listening to Get Rich Education. Ken McElroy and I have been talking about where do the cracks show? What are those indications out there that show that you might not be able to get rent increases in the future? And we're talking about what tenants want. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. We'll be right back. Are you looking to invest in your first investment property or grow your existing inventory? Highlands Residential Mortgage can help, offering down payments as low as 15% and credit score requirements down to 620. Their streamlined process is designed to help investors close their loans quickly and without any surprises. You need someone who knows cash flowing real estate and can help guide you through the muddy waters of today's lending environment. So call Graham Parham today, toll free at 855-326-6802. The Parham team can help you purchase or refinance any of your 1 to 4 family investment properties.
NMLS number 195724, 12001 North Central Expressway, Suite 750, Dallas, Texas 75243. Equal housing lender, not licensed in all states.
As a lot of investors know, multifamily real estate has been one of the best asset classes to be invested in most of the last decade. While the great deals have been harder to find lately, there are still opportunities in select markets where savvy investors can get lots of appreciation and strong cash flow if you have a great team. Dave Zook, founder and president of The Real Asset Investor, and his team have been very active in the multifamily space in Memphis, Tennessee. On the heels of the Great Recession of 2009, Dave and his team quietly started acquiring multifamily assets, and in the last few years, he has syndicated over 2,000 apartment units, creating strong cash flow streams and big appreciation for lots of their investors. It's not too late to get involved. If you're an accredited investor and you would like to learn more about investing in great multifamily apartments with a world-class team, email Dave and his team at info@therealassetinvestor.com.
We're Rich Dad Advisors, Josh and Lisa Lannon.
Be who you are becoming. Listen to Get Rich Education with Keith Weinhold.
Welcome back to Get Rich Education with our guest, Rich Dad Advisor Ken McElroy. We're talking about what tenants want. As an investor, ultimately, you need to serve a tenant and keep them happy in order to be successful. And MC companies with owning more than 10,000 units, they've got data on this stuff. They're not just taking stabs in the dark. They're not just being anecdotal. They're being accurate. And, one gauge that you can get on the temper of a market and where trends are going is when a tenant leaves, when a tenant vacates your turnkey single-family home or vacates your apartment unit. You want to find out why. Did that tenant leave because they didn't like the amenities you had and they're moving across the street? Did that tenant leave because they got a new job in a different metro? Or did that tenant leave because they want to go buy a property? So, Ken, what are the reasons you see for people leaving, and is there any sort of trend there?
Well, it's interesting. There can be trends. We track every move out. I'll tell you what, Keith, resident retention is one of the more important things that I don't talk about a lot, but it's one of the more important things that we do. We actually have a full-time staff member here in Scottsdale just for that reason. And she basically has a hotline, a phone number right to the corporate office to talk about any and all issues that might be going on with a tenant. We actually call everybody and email everybody when they move in. And so staying in touch with your tenant during the term of the lease, in my opinion, is one of the most important things. We call it touch points. We try to touch each tenant at least one time each month. Now, that could be an email. It could be something we could put on their door. It could be whatever. But the point is, I think you're trying to build a relationship with this person. What we do, of course, is we know when they move out. And so because we have a relationship with them, and so now we're in a position to be able to find out why. There's a ton of reasons. And going back to 2005, 2006, oddly enough, and not surprising, the reason is that they were buying houses. As you know, there was a lot of cheap debt, and all you had to do was basically fog a mirror and you could get a mortgage, So I think times are different now. Now banks, surprisingly, as you probably should have done from the beginning, they're requiring down payments in full, and they're requiring people to be working and all the things that they probably should have done the first time around. But so that's non-existent now. We do have some people moving into homes, buying homes. And I think ultimately, Keith, that's what people want generally. There is a segment of the population that we're starting to see that likes the mobility, and the reasons are all over the map. But let me just classify a few of them. Depending on the level of management, it very well could be the landlord, the property manager, the condition of the property, a safety factor. Safety factors are much higher for women than they are for men. So there's a whole piece that we do to our properties for lighting and cutting shrubs back and having gated communities, for example, and making the properties completely safe at night, things like that, from their carports or from their parking space. Those are things that are very, very important that sometimes don't come up. And you're going to find that a lot more with the females. But that's one issue. That's why people do move. Oddly enough, it's a small percentage, but a lot of people do move for safety reasons. And then sometimes we always ask why they're moving from where they are. Another one, as you can imagine, is job relocation, especially today. People are moving more than ever to where jobs are. And the jobs are just like we talked about today in Anchorage, Alaska. The reason why you had negative employment and negative population growth is because people are moving. You got to find out where they're moving to, because you have a lot of people primarily in the oil business. Same in Texas. If they're engineers, they're going to move to somewhere else they can be an engineer. And so that might be San Francisco, that might be Boston, that might be Seattle, that could be wherever. So you have to kind of look at it from that standpoint. There's a fair amount of movement based on employment that will always be. Very rarely, honestly, have we seen that people move because of the configuration of their apartment, because moving can cost a fair amount of money, and changing over utilities and getting a moving van or paying first and last month or coming up with that money for rent and all that stuff. Those are all considerations. Generally, that's not the case unless there's been a new changeover in ownership or management and some things have significantly changed. The other thing that can happen, and I talked a little bit about this a minute ago, is if your rents are, let's say, $50 or $100 under market, and you try to raise them $50 or $100, the chances of them moving are a lot higher than if you go 25 or 30 and try to do it over the next couple of years.
Absolutely.
So I understand both ways, I do, but we're long-term hold guys, and so if we buy a building, and let's say it's $75 or $100 under market, and that's the opportunity, and that's why we buy it, we would never raise everybody $75 or $100 in the first year. We would always work with each person individually, sit down with them, talk to them, tell them that they're way under market, and slowly chip away at them, because we want that extra $25 or that extra $30. You can lose that in one day of vacancy. So it's not worth jacking rents, just a few days of vacancy, because you're going to have more than that when they move. You got to clean the unit, paint the unit, remarket the unit. That could take a month, could take 2 weeks, could take 2-3 months. So the vacancy loss, we manage that as tight as we can as we're making all those decisions. But it's a number of decisions. Another really popular one, this is a little tip for your group. If you buy a property in an amazing school district, you'll have a lot more renters, because we stumbled upon this actually about over 10 years ago in Plano, Texas, where we bought a property in a district was public that was the best public school in the state of Texas. And we didn't actually know this when we bought it. And what we found is that renters will move, literally. They'll move a mile to be in a different school district to have their kids in a really, really good school. So there's all these little things that you'll find, marriages, divorces, you name it. There's so many factors. It doesn't come down to just one. But generally, my experience has been, Keith, that you really can't retain people when you have life circumstances change for them. And the best thing you can do is buy in a really, really good location and have that really well thought out and manage it extremely well. And from there, your turnover is going to be generally job relocations, and it's going to be buying a home. Those are the two top ones if you've bought your real estate well. But if you bought a nice property in a crappy area and there's crime, you're going to have that issue.
Yeah, that location is just something that can't be changed. You can do some good things to your building and your property, but you just can't do much to save or change the neighborhood around you. And you touched on so much there. Yeah, I've been investing in real estate in income property since 2002. And sure enough, in 2005, I remember that I was having a lot of vacancy in turnover. I was only invested in Anchorage, Alaska at that point, and that's because it was so easy to get a loan and anyone could move out. And, the clerk at the convenience store that made an income that was far less than the local median could go ahead and get a loan for a property because they could just state their income, stated income loans, where they could just state whatever their income was, and no one was verifying that. So that was a problem when it was so easy to get a loan. So I think us as real estate investors, we want some ease to get a loan for ourselves, but we don't want it so easy that we go ahead and lose our tenants. And I am pretty sure that inevitably and invariably that pendulum will swing back at some point to the period where it's so easy to get a loan that we're losing tenants for that reason again, and that they do want to go and buy, but it just doesn't feel like we're there now. And this retention is so important because we're talking about fundamentals that are important to a profitable business. And number one is retaining your customer. And number two is the fact that it is easier to go ahead and retain a customer that's existing than it is to go ahead and find a new one. Ken, when it comes to identifying the right property, I'd just like to ask, what are the data sources that you use? Real estate is something so fractured. I just don't think there's one general, omniscient, all-knowing source or website. But did you have any in particular that you and MC companies use to help identify the best properties and locations over the long term?
Yeah, of course. We try to buy in areas that are a little more affluent, where the home prices are, say, $300,000, $400,000, $500,000, $600,000, even $1 million. And if we can find those markets and find, renters or rentals in those particular markets, we've done very, very well with that. And that could be an A property, a B, or a C. People, what they do is they figure out where they want to be, and then they figure out where their budget fits. And so I think everybody, their ego gets in the way and they think, this is the best thing ever. This is the best price. You should be here. But at the end of the day, those decisions are already being made. They're deciding, hey, I don't want to drive an hour to work. I want to drive 15 minutes, and this will save me an hour and a half every day round trip. I can spend more time with my kid, if they get a job change. So those are the kinds of decisions that are being made that kind of bring people to where they are. But the data points that we look at are, of course, school districts, housing, the average household income is a big one that we look at. This data is from all over the place. Anything that's happening in the market from a development standpoint or an infrastructure standpoint, whether that's a private developer or even the city. So, for example, we ended up buying a piece of land in Peoria, Arizona, which was not far from the city core, because the city of Peoria had $1 billion infrastructure 10-year plan to do all the stuff in the immediate area of Peoria, and we're basically smack right in the middle of it. We bought another deal in Tempe that is in the path of the light rail. So those are the kinds of decisions that we make based on all these little decisions that are happening in all these different municipalities. And they could be going the other way too, Keith. I mean, sometimes people hunker down and say, we don't want these things. Like Scottsdale, for example, Scottsdale, Arizona, which is where I live, they basically have said no to light rail. And so we're starting to see more development and more acquisitions along the light rail lines as the light rail rolls out here in Arizona. Same thing happened in Denver, Colorado. The light rail did go into downtown, and there were certain municipalities that didn't want it. So the ones that they got it, people started snapping up properties on either side of the light rail, because people go there, they park, they get on the light rail, they commute into town, and they can avoid the freeways and an hour commute or whatever. And so we did the exact same thing in Portland. The other thing that we did in Portland is there was an urban growth boundary around the city, and that was a big one, because same thing in Flagstaff, Arizona, there's an urban growth boundary around the city. And what that does, Keith, it basically says no to urban sprawl, and everything inside the circle gets expensive. As it grows to the circle, then it's got to basically go up, and you're looking at redevelopment. So it's no different than if it was an island, right? It was surrounded by water. So those are the little things that we look for as we're trying to buy. And we're trying to buy in markets that are going to be good long-term and have good value for our investors, have really good employment over the long haul, and they're fairly affluent. And we've been pretty good so far.
Yeah, this is macro big picture stuff, looking at infrastructure development plan for urban areas. And yeah, this is the kind of stuff that would be illegal insider information in stocks, but it's completely legal here. It's smart knowledge here. Any particular websites that you like that our listeners might not be familiar with when you research these things?
Yeah, so, I'm a member of anything and everything, probably just like yourself. I like the National Multi-Housing Council, NMHC. I like the National Apartment Association, the NAA. I think it's naahq.org. I really like Urban Land Institute, ULI.
Yeah.
I devour that stuff because it's really, really very macro, and it covers all the different asset classes. So I really, really like that. Literally, I subscribe to anything I can. Sometimes there's brokers that are really tuned into that stuff, and I get on their newsletters. All the major brokerage houses, whether it's Cushman Wakefield or Grubb & Ellis or CBRE or Newmark or Berkshire, it doesn't really matter. They all have in-house economists that look at all this stuff. Now, typically they're a little salesy, because they're trying to promote markets, but they do have good data in there that says, hey, this company's relocating and bringing, 1,000 jobs, or this industry is going backwards because of this. Or like when I was in Seattle, we lost Boeing to Chicago. And of course, people knew that a year before they moved. And so that's important information. So those are the kinds of things, if you're going to invest in Chicago, that's a great deal. But also it's a good thing to watch in Seattle because those property values are going to go down in that particular area in the short run, right? Somebody will shore up and a new company will move in, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So those big market moves, the best thing is they're in the paper every day. You know what I mean? Like you open any newspaper on any page, there's an argument that I could say almost everything in there is a real estate play of some sort. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah, totally. You read about another Macy's shutting down or another Sears shutting down. That's effectively a real estate story. And on the other side, you want to read about the trends where the new Amazon distribution center is going to be located.
Yeah, right. Exactly. The real estate's really slowing down. It is. And I think that you can, with a little bit of foresight and a little bit of patience, if you're not in the flip mode and you're a long-term business owner like you are and I am, you can do very, very, very well. It might not happen in the first couple of years, but it will definitely happen over a period of time if you're a long-term hold type investor.
Well, Ken, just real quickly as we're winding down here, if you just want to list really quick hit the best ways to increase a net operating income on a property once someone does buy, and then the dumbest ways to try to increase a net operating income.
Yeah, I've seen a lot. I think, whenever we buy a property, Keith, we're looking at the capital needs. So this is an easy one for your listeners. Basically, anything exterior does not increase NOI, in my opinion. We don't roofs, paint, none of that. We just say it has to be incredibly well maintained for somebody to walk up to it. While that might get you more traffic and it might get you a higher occupancy, it's not necessarily going to get you a higher rent. But, how do you put a value on the building looks better now, right?
Yeah. And see, now this is a really interesting comment, because a lot of people talk about curb appeal, and you're saying that mostly exterior things just don't play out for an investor.
That's my belief, unless they're security gates. So, we've done a lot of those where we take a property, we'll put security gates. As I touched on a little bit earlier, safety is a big issue for a lot of people, and security gates do give them a little more comfort. And that can be a little bit different. But if I were to say a number, it would be less than $10 a month. So the real money is inside, in my opinion. The exterior has to be in good shape. And nobody's going to pay more for a seal-coated driveway.
Right.
So when you start to look at inside the units, that's where you're going to see the net operating income increase. And the mistakes that I've seen, quite honestly, in there have been people overspend. So, for example, they'll put in Formica or they'll put in granite countertops. Well, I can tell you that a renter is not going to pay more for a granite countertop. And I also know that granite countertops could be $1,000 more. They're not going to pay more for stainless steel appliance with a drink thing in the door, which could be another $500 or $600. And so you start to look at what tenants pay for. People, what they do is they overspend on flooring, they overspend on appliances, they overspend in a lot of places inside of a unit. And so our average interiors are, say, between $3,000 and $4,000, let's say. And for that, we would like $50, $75 to $100, depending on the market. But I've gone to multiple properties and multiple deals where people have spent $10,000, $15,000. And so they'll spend, let's say, $10,000 more than us per unit. So on a 300 unit building, that's $3 million. But I can tell you that the rents are not going to be more, because when you walk in, whether it's black or stainless or white or Formica or something that looks like Formica, you're just not going to see the rent increase beyond that. So there's a point of no return. A lot of people do this in their own individual homes too. Like, they over improve areas.
Yeah.
And then let's say they landscape their backyard, stick $100,000 back there. Well, it just doesn't translate. People don't pay a lot more. And so it's the same. And so that's a big one. Another one we touched on is that a lot of times people try to push rents beyond their market. And this is a big mistake. So somebody buys something based on what a broker says it should be, and they start to push rents and they create vacancy. And that vacancy, of course, translates into lower cash flow. There's all these intangibles that happen when there's a vacancy. So we turn a unit in 3 days. So that's our average. So from the time a tenant moves out, it's back on the market in 4 days. So I know from a fact that, because I've walked thousands and thousands of units, that I've seen units that have been off the market for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months. So that's a huge NOI killer. And then people rob stuff from units they rob a thermostat or a water heater or a washer and dryer or stick it in another unit to get it rent ready. And then, they start cannibalizing units. And so that's another NOI killer. There's just so many things, in my opinion. Managing the actual leasing agent and the manager is another one, because truthfully, even I love all my managers, but we have 350 employees and we have some phenomenal managers. But the truth is there's additional pressure and stress if they have to rent the unit at 25 or 50 higher the next time. And so sometimes it's easier just to rent it for what it was rented for. That's an NOI killer. So there's a million little things that happen on a daily basis that are NOI killers. From renting a unit for the same price for 1 year again, that's an NOI killer, as opposed to the automatic rent increases and keeping up with the market and things like that. So there's so many, Keith, that we could do a whole show on this. There's a lot of little nuances that happen from the time a tenant moves in to the time a tenant moves out, when you're getting the unit ready, to what you do inside of it, to what the market can bear, that can be NOI killers.
Yeah, and it's those intangibles that makes this so interesting to talk about. And I made a lot of those mistakes myself, trying to raise the rent too high, usually because I was influenced by an agent. And then I learned, I don't want to be influenced by an agent. They're incentivized to tell me that rents are going to be higher, so I will pay more for purchases. And I like to get what the rent amount's going to be from my property manager, because they're the ones that have to actually go get that rent amount for me. So I put a bit more credence in what they say. And yeah, as far as the over improvement, just to bring it down to simple terms, Ken, I tell my listeners what my mission is, and it's generally to provide housing that's clean, safe, affordable, and functional. No less than that, because I don't want to be called a slumlord, but no more than that, because as soon as I try to do features and fixtures that reflect things like words that are opulence or beauty, that's exactly when I start to lose, and I just don't get that much more rent proportionally for the improvement. I might do opulent and beautiful at my home, but in my own home, I have the benefit of living there. I don't have the benefit of getting to use luxury quartz countertops in my Class C multifamily apartment building, and that's why I don't put them there. Well, Ken, in closing, you just kind of have any advice for someone looking to start in real estate in 2017, and like why one would even want to potentially pick real estate to diversify into or to go all out into in 2017 versus other investment classes?
Well, I think real estate is still the best asset class to be in personally. based on business and commodities and stocks and bonds and mutual funds and all those things. The issue we have currently, Keith, is that the market's pretty hot. And so every market has an opportunity somewhere. They just have to figure out where it is. For example, in the last year, I've been looking at, and I have bought some office buildings, and we're building a self-storage in Corpus Christi, Texas. And, we're starting to branch out ourselves from multifamily because multifamily is so expensive. We're not seeing any of the returns. That's why we haven't bought anything. We looked at 600 deals in the last 12 months, and we made offers on over 50. We ended up with just one.
Yeah.
And we have to stay disciplined and stick to our guns. There's a lot of syndicators out there that need the money, and they're going to raise money because they need money. And they're going to put people in deals right now. But in my opinion, it's a terrible time to buy multifamily in most metros. But being that said, there's a huge glut for single family home. As you know, there's a lot of people in rentals that want to be in single family. And I was just talking to one of my friends this week about this at Lincoln, Nebraska. He said, if you're in the 350 price point, they basically pre-sell out. It's because there hasn't been anything built in 10 years. And there are niches everywhere. You just have to find them. It's impossible for me to make a blanket statement on invest in this because it'll be different in North Phoenix to South Phoenix to completely different. So it has to be market specific, and you have to look for the demand in that particular market. But I'm very bullish on real estate long term. I love the depreciation. I love the cash flow. I love using debt and other people's money to buy it. I love giving my money to investors when they invest, from all the research we've done and the deals we bought. So I'm very, very bullish on the industry long term.
Well, Ken, you've inspired countless people with your work and your books and your seminar appearances. So, let us know these days, where's the best place for our listeners to keep up with you?
Oh, thanks, Keith. Yeah, so obviously, KenMcElroy.com is where everybody should go. That's KenMcElroy.com. What I've been doing is I've been putting videos up based on things we just talked about. So we have several hundred videos up there now. We're adding more every week. And, it's a great way for me to communicate and for people to stay in touch with kind of what's happening. And then it's interactive too. We have people that are sending emails in, and then we try to do whatever we can, do a video specifically for our listeners so that, it's very specific to what they needs.
Yeah, Ken has something called KenFlix that you can find out about through KenMcElroy.com. And there's just these really high quality, very well done whiteboard videos where Ken is the instructor in the whiteboard video himself. And it's just a great way to understand a lot of real estate conceptually and with numbers that you can't do nearly as well through an audio medium like this. And yeah, Ken even takes basically follower questions and answers them right there on the KenFlix videos. And it's very inexpensive to subscribe to that. I've been a subscriber for quite a long time myself.
Keith, I really appreciate your time, and I really appreciate everything you're doing for these real estate investors. I think it's important. Where we're heading next is the most important time because I've seen a lot of people are going to get annihilated and they're going to lose everything in the next 5 years. And so I've watched it over and over and over, even with really close friends of mine. The irrational exuberance, right? So you just got to be careful, invest well, make the right decisions, be very, very, very careful and very thoughtful and very strategic, and you can do very well and weather the storm.
Like they say, you make your profit when you buy. Ken McElroy, thanks so much for coming back on to Get Rich Education.
My pleasure, Keith. Always a pleasure.
Well, plenty of both good news and bad news for real estate investors in there. Have a mission. You've known for a long time that my mission is to provide tenants with housing that is 4 things: clean, safe, affordable, and functional. That way, I'm doing good in the world and I never get called the slumlord. Ken and I discussed really quite a bit of the last 2 there, affordable and functional. So he's bullish on real estate investing long-term, but had a pretty clear warning there at the end that he thinks some people are going to be feeling some pain sometime in the next 5 years. He thinks that some people are overpaying for multifamily property in 2017 and the next few years. I've told you before, both now and in the near future, I favor income property single-family homes over multifamily. Of course, there's still opportunity in both. That's just a general trend. Special thanks to Ken McElroy today. Check out Get Rich Education's good friend at kenmcelroy.com. I've been coming to you with a new show every single Friday without fail since October 2014. And we'll be back next Friday to do what? To help you build your wealth. I'm going to share weapons of mass production with you with some of our favorite real estate investing and productivity websites and apps. We'll see you then. Don't quit your daydream.
You've been listening to Get Rich Education, telling you what the wealthy won't tell you about real estate and investing.
Nothing on this show should be considered specific, personal, or professional advice. Please consult an appropriate tax, legal, real estate, financial, or business professional for individualized advice. Opinions of guests are their own. Information is not guaranteed. All investment strategies have the potential for profit or loss. The host is operating on behalf of Get Rich Education, LLC exclusively.
Cash flow real estate investors nationwide and worldwide, this is Get Rich Education's Keith Weinhold. Forbes has rated Memphis, Tennessee as the #1 cash flowing market in the world. Our good friends at Mid-South Homebuyers have been Memphis's premier turnkey real estate provider for 14 years with a stellar reputation and an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau. Owner Terry Kerr was born and raised in Memphis. Yeah, he knows the market and has renovated and sold over 1,000 houses in the Memphis area. Find out what their many repeat buyers already know. Their houses are completely renovated, even come with a 1-year builder's warranty and a lifelong rental guarantee. They're a perfect fit for the first-time out-of-state investor or the seasoned investor diversifying their portfolio. Mid-South Homebuyers' friendly staff makes investing easy. Learn more at midsouthhomebuyers.com or give them a call at 901-217-HOME. The preceding program was brought to you by your home for wealth building, GetRichEducation.com.